guys, it's your girl Virgo Queen here, and you are watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering the sport of mixed martial arts since the 1990s, and Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 events worldwide. Please subscribe to the channel and be on the lookout for future episodes. In the meantime, you can catch me here on TikTok at Virgo Queen, one and only. Thanks.
All right, this is Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate, and we're back with another episode of MMA Conspiracy Hour. And as always, before we start, subscribe to the channel, like the video, support us. We love making content, and the more the merrier. We welcome everybody that likes what we're doing. And we're going to talk today about the GFL launch Global Fight League. And, I talked to Miguel about this offline about kind of what their just early indications were of what they were going to do. And Miguel, I kind of wanted to give you a chance to kind of just start off on that.
Well, Todd gave me the name Mystic Miguel, so I'm going to give the fans out there a chance to get in on predictions here. So I'm going to give you a multiple choice. A, 2025. B, 2026. C, 2027. There is no other choice. Which of those 3 years will be the last year for the GFL? It's that simple. They're following formula that's been tried in MMA at several high levels, because like for example the PFL, that they're copying some format from the PFL. Even with the Ngannou signing, I feel like most of the business and fans especially are still waiting to see something. You know what I mean? It's not like they've made progress or, are getting their name out there more or anything like that. Another company that they have some things in common with, it was the IFL. And the IFL was on television and they had resources. I happened to work with one of the big MMA collectors, a guy named Ed Tyson, and Ed bought the remnants of the IFL. He didn't buy the IFL when it was operational, but after they were bankrupt and shut down, he bought, the office inventory and the rest of their T-shirts and things like that, and he has it all sitting in his collection. I can tell you from what I saw that the IFL had considerable resources, but the formula didn't work. And these guys have chosen to follow those formulas as opposed to the one formula that we have that works here, and that's the UFC. So we'll see. The GFL Global Fight League, they announced a roster of about 50 fighters, very well-known names. I think nobody can deny very well-known names. But at the same time, we've been playing around in our conversation with, the GFL is actually the geriatric fight league, because, I saw somebody mention it, they've got fighters that actually legitimately have post-traumatic stress syndrome from their careers that are signed. What are they going to do with Vanderlei Silva at 48 years old? Are they going to really put him in the ring again? Get hit in the head more? So yeah, I feel bad. It reminds me when I was with Bodog, and with Bodog, we were one of the first companies that maybe had comparable. We had a billionaire, and Dana had his billionaires. But Dana said it. He said, another guy who wants to lose his money, and it's strange to me because Bodog at this point is getting close to 20 years ago. So we were like the first guys with a big major sponsor like that. And, we stopped doing it because it was in the red. And Dana predicted it. He goes, another billionaire that wants to lose their money. It surprises me that you're still finding people that want to follow formulas that didn't work and think they're going to make it work somehow. So yeah, more power to him. This is it, Darren Owen. I think he's the guy that secured the finances. He secured the finances in September, is what I read. So I guess from September to now is how he filled out that 50-man roster. And, if you're Vanderlei Silva sitting at home and somebody calls you up and say, "Hey, we got some money to throw your way for a contract and stuff," man, those guys, Vanderlei Silva's not even in the lawsuit probably. I mean, I guess he fought in the United States and may get a bite, but he's not going to get money for the pride fights and for everything. He's a guy that, especially for his name recognition, probably didn't make the money he deserved in this sport. And he probably feels that, you know. He sees John Jones and Conor McGregor, and he's not on that level. So he's got to be like, okay, yeah, I'm 48 years old. I've got PTSD, but you want to give me money? Sure, I'll sign. Just like I said, they've chosen to follow failed formulas, and I don't see what specialness they bring that is going to make a failed formula work again. It's literally uh, the definition of insanity, right? Try the same thing and expect a different result, and that's what I see in the GFL. I feel bad for him, but they've already gone down the wrong path. And I've consulted for companies in the past. It's been a long time, but I consulted for companies in the past that I told them exactly what I'm saying here. If you want to follow the UFC formula, these are the steps you got to take in order to try to achieve what they do. One of them is to scale up to do shows constantly. And the other one is to work on your sponsorship, obviously, but also your outlets, your TV outlets. So if you have a TV channel that says, well, the season's over in August, and then we're going to do reruns for 3 months, and then you can come back on, that isn't going to work. So sign on to them, and then for the 3 months where they're doing their reruns, you've got to have the ability to be on another TV channel and still doing your show. That's what the UFC does. But again, when you tell somebody who's been down the wrong path for a little while that they've gone down the wrong path and this is what it would take to correct it, they're not going to want to hear that. So, yeah, to me, the GFL is already a fail. The other thing that tells you um, that it's a fail is that the UFC, they see it like pests, a fly. It's not even something that's on their radar to worry about. It's of zero concern to them because there's nothing there that has any real substance.
Right. What I'm doing now is I'm looking at Darren Owens, his background. He served as this a CDO or COD or COO of PFL. So he was with PFL, and he was one of the founders of World Series of Fighting Canada.
Okay,
So he
where's
has
World
some
Series of?
background as far as like MMA promotions go.
So he knew how to get a hold of Vanderlei Silva, is what that tells me.
Yeah, and then he
You
had
know
a
what I
couple
mean?
of
So,
other guys that I don't know what their roles are, but yeah,
like, look, the World Series of Fighting, PFL. There's nothing in those companies that tells me that they had a formula that worked. I think that the World Series of Fighting and the PFL are actually the PFL emerged from the wreckage of the WSOF, right? Aren't they sort of the same company in the roots?
uh, yeah. I mean, the
So
PFL emerged from World Series of Fighting to a certain degree. Yeah,
yeah, so his experiences with companies that are failing and have failed, you know, his experiences working, and if Don Davis, who checks in and out of the sport periodically to take a look at what's going on, uh, if he can't impress him and he can't drive that, I present to you that the PFL has some decent resources. Don Davis on the business end is a presentable billionaire type who can rub elbows with, you know, Qatar and places like that and actually secure financing for that stuff. Um, like a billionaire, again, and we've said this before, but what I can absolutely assure you of is that him being a billionaire means nothing because he's never going to fund PFL if they're short from his own money. You know what I mean? So if you're not able to take over that company and run with it and make it a success, not free hand because Don Davis is really hands off, then what makes you think you're qualified to start another company and follow the same formula? This is a formula for failure and a formula to lose all the money he secured in September. And I feel bad, but I'm actually kind of been around long enough that I was with a company that had that similar uh, history go down, and I'm not matchmaking or in the business with a company anymore because my companies didn't work. But I can't believe the number of companies that have come afterwards and have continued to fail, and nobody wants to try something different or something new or listen to people with real experience. One of the things I mentioned to you before about Vanderlei Silva, it's like, okay, not to toot my own horn, but I was at Vanderlei Silva's first UFC fight when he fought Vitor Belfort in Brazil. I was the only American that he interviewed after he got slaughtered in that fight that he allowed to interview him. I went to his hotel room with my translator, and he was sitting on a bed crying. And Rudy Mark told me, he goes, "You're the only guy we're going to talk to from the United States because we just had a bad day," kind of thing. Um, the only reason I say that is because dealing with Vanderlei Silva at this point in his career sounds to me like a fanboy move. It's like, yeah, we're working with Vanderlei, we're doing this. It's like Vanderlei doesn't really bring a lot of added value. What you would need to do, I think, is to see, does he have a gym? Does he have students? Does he have a team that he's nurturing and bringing? Because, yeah, if you've got Vanderlei in the corner there, and you've got him and his name recognition, there may be some residual value, but you've got to deliver that week after week after week. If you think you're going to put him in the cage and rekindle, his fights with Quentin Jackson or whatever, you're sadly mistaken, and you don't understand how the sport works, especially when the wheels come off of an athlete, and you're talking about a 48-year-old. If they think they're going to put him in the ring, and that goes down the entire list of the roster they're presenting. Fabrizio, we're done. Like, again, it's like you can't be impressed by, and the first thing their press release says, we have 6 former UFC champions. It's like, is that supposed to impress me? You have 6 unemployed guys, and the reason they're unemployed is because they can no longer perform at the level when they did become UFC champions. And again, I don't want to say I'm immune to that. I was very excited and happy when I had a chance to work with Fedor, and Fedor was maybe already starting to slide a little bit. He wasn't totally in his prime, but I was a fanboy. I was like, yeah, I definitely, we got to make a fight for Fedor. I'll find somebody, Um, but you've got, with my experience, it's like there isn't a single name on that list that is going to make a difference when you present this to the public. Fabrizio, we're done. It's like, dude, does anybody even know or remember the first time Fabrizio were done appeared on the MMA scene? Because he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. His black belt is from the Bering family. The Berings are, you've got the Gracies, you've got the Machados, and you've got the Berings. Bering's black belt, his teacher's black belt is from Hickson Gracie. There's another era of 70s fighters that were in that circle of jiu-jitsu guys that were at the cutting edge. When they started their diaspora to spread jiu-jitsu across the world, the Berings went to Europe. And Fabrizio Wardun was in Spain. Those were some of his first stops in the MMA world. And the first time he actually appeared was at Abu Dhabi in Brazil, 2003. And he was hired as Mark Kerr's jiu-jitsu coach. And he showed up, and he's a big guy, that point, he was young, charismatic, knew decent English, spoke Spanish. He's a bright guy. And he networked, and he actually got himself into the heavyweight tournament in Abu Dhabi and stuff like that. And then from there, his career took off. Few people will remember that his first appearance ever was Mark Kerr's coach at 2003 Abu Dhabi when he lost to Ricardo Arona. I was there. I got to judge Kerr's fights. I got to judge Gordon's fights. Again, that doesn't. I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say that I can realistically not be blinded by, oh, Fabrizio Wardun, he's a huge name, former UFC champion. So you have to be realistic. He's been around more than 20 years in a sport where you're lucky if you have 10 years of shelf life. And that's what I see repeated over and over on the roster these guys have announced. So it's already dead.
I'm looking at the co-founder, his background. That's what I've been kind of researching while we're talking. Looks like he was part of like a founder of something called Arivia TV, like a streaming type of service, a streaming platform of sorts, and live streaming event platform, for professional creators and organizations. And looks like he was
And
with
what was it? What's the name of the company?
Arevea. He was the founder of this. But it looks
So,
like it.
for example, if when I think of streaming companies that jumped into this, the big one I remember, and there have been a couple, and some of them may have been ahead of their time, but the big one I remember is DAZN.
Mhm.
And where's DAZN now? This
Yeah.
company that you just mentioned doesn't even have DAZN's pedigree or background. It's just some streaming company, and he's still looking for. I've got streaming company. I've got the ability to stream. Okay, what do you stream? What do you offer? Why would I pay you for your streaming service? And if he thinks, the PF or the GFL is going to be the crown jewel of a streaming service now, he's way off. He's way off. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think streaming people fight people from defunct shows and things like that don't try something new are going to find themselves in trouble. We talked in a recent podcast about the possibility of the UFC eventually getting on something like a Netflix, you know, and what that would do is, obviously it would put them in front of hundreds of millions of people. But why is that? Because Netflix already has hundreds of millions of customers. Why is that? Because Netflix has enough money around now that they can produce their own shows, and they can also buy old shows and reruns and things like that. And you could go on to Netflix and watch shows that are maybe not even martial arts related, obviously, 24/7. That's what attracts hundreds of millions of people, not the GFL. And then it's like, okay, the season's over. We're gonna have 2 months without GFL. What else is on the streaming service I'm paying for? What does Arevia have? What have
There's
you
this
been
thing.
able to find?
It says he founded something called Combat Plus. I can't find anything on it at all. And then he's CEO of Big B AI, like artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Good luck
So
with that. Good luck. So
yeah, it just
let me see.
seems. Yeah.
So you've got players like Google and Microsoft, and a guy like Elon Musk who's talked about maybe jumping into the AI game because he's not satisfied with some of the things that are going on in current AI. And with Elon Musk, whether you like him or hate him, at the very least, you've got a guy with a working knowledge and a brain resource where he understands what AI is and what's going on. So this guy with his big B AI or whatever,
I can't find anything on that either.
you're going to compete with Google? Is that what this guy's trying to tell me? That he's going to jump into Google's game? So he's doing the same thing there that he's doing in this game. Is he's going to jump in with a company and face a monster like the UFC, and in AI face a monster like Google that already chat. GTP or GPT has been out for years now. And it took it a little bit of time for it to really make an impact. But now there are people who are making their jobs. There are websites where you can put a couple of words in and it'll make a video for you. Make an animated video, make voiceovers, write a book for you based on just full lines of story and stuff like that. And they're powered by guys like Google. So, in other words, if you use that formula, now you've got Google who can also say, hey, you can publish that on Google. We can get that out there and stuff. What does this guy offer? I think it sounds to me like, yeah, like guys that are using the hot names and the hot phrases, maybe attract unknowing sponsors, unknowing backers that are trying to get into the game. It's like, if I have 400,000 or even a couple of $1 million to invest, and you got a sharp tongued guy who's talking about AI and things like that, you might be talked into parting with your money. And you know why? Because Google doesn't need your couple of $1 million investment. At the end of the day, and if you have some success, Google will just come in and be like, all right, we'll buy you. You did something good. Give it to us. Here's some money. So yeah, none and the compare Google's obviously a monster, but in the MMA game, you have to equate the UFC to that.
Yep.
So thinking you're going to take them on with a failed formula because you were smart enough, or I don't know them personally, but enough of a shyster to actually get people to give you some money. What is your war chest? He said, we've secured our money since September. So what does that mean? How much do you have? Because the UFC went 40 million into the hole with the Fertitta's own money. And, who knows how much more they would have gone in there. The Fertittas had a passion for it, but are you willing to lose $40 million?
Yeah.
Does the sponsors who gave you that money, so I'm assuming they don't have one dude that gave them 40 million.
Right.
So they pieced it together. Say they have 40 investors at $1 million each.
He said it was a Silicon Valley investor. He didn't say investors.
Okay. So you got
But
one
maybe it
big
is
money
one guy.
So maybe you got one big money guy. But I can tell you, I had a big money guy named Calvin Ayre.
Right.
And Calvin Ayre did Bodog Fight. A lot of what people don't know is that Bodog Fight was a subsidiary of Bodog Entertainment. And, there's a lot of lore and stories about Calvin. But what we were told, and it's believable because Calvin was a lifestyle guy. Like Calvin found at one point when he was already on the Forbes list and a billionaire and stuff like that. And it's, he's got a lot of Trump in him in that it's, was he really a billionaire or just a guy with a lot of money that got himself on the list somehow, But the story says that at some point a bookkeeper came up to him and said, hey, check this out. And he gave him bank account information where he had $55 million that he sort of, I guess, had forgotten about. And he said, okay, let's take that money and make Bodog Entertainment, which was Flight Company, Bodog Flight, and also Bodog Music. But once that $55 million was gone, he didn't come up and be like, well, yeah, let's keep going. There's another $55 million. I know he had that $55 million. He could have done that, but it's distasteful for those guys that play at that level to actually not have success because they're used to success. And the story with Calvin, the origin story is he's a bright guy. He's one of the guys that wrote one of the first codes that allowed you to play poker online. And there's certain variations of this, and now they're packages. So if I wanted to start an online casino, MiguelGamble.com, I could go out and buy a package and open a poker room, and it will have source code that might be Calvin's or might be one of the other variations. But as the owner of that code, especially in the old days, that's what catapulted him into $1 million. When he wrote the code, the story goes that he said, I want to make $10 million and just retire to Costa Rica. And he made $10 million in a week. So it's like, what am I going to retire now? In a week? So he kept it going, and that's how he became the big entity he has. But in nowhere was it like he was $55 million in the hole. That's what makes the Fertitta and the Dana White story, whether you like it or not, special, is that they were willing to withstand something that no investor really withstands. That's Warren Buffett.
It's always what you come back around to, passion.
Yeah,
Passion
yeah.
made them willing to burn that money.
Ask Warren Buffett what he would do if he said, okay, I'm going to invest in any company. Here's a $50 million investment. And at the end of the day, the guys that you gave the money to come back with their friggin', sorry to be vulgar, but with their dicks in their hands and go, can we have more money because we're out? Warren Buffett would be out too. He would not reinvest, no matter how successful or how um, high end potential he sees in that company, because what it also amounts to is that you have to have confidence in the executives and the people that you put in there. And a guy that just lost you 50 million, like you'd be okay. I am ready to keep investing in AI, but I need a different guy. I can't have this guy. This guy just lost me $50 million.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, every just example of a company like this just all comes back to they're following a formula that has failed already. They're trying it again, expecting a different result. Everybody knows the saying. It's not a great way to do business. You need something different. And then also, yes, the passion. You had guys, maybe not huge money players like multi-billionaire guys, but like a Dan Lambert. This sport would not be where it is today if Dan had quit after the first couple of $1 million he lost. And then after that, when he saw that the business was making money for other companies and stuff, he changed his approach and stuff, and it stopped being his hobby, and he was spending the money. It's like, yeah, it's fun for me. But again, it was passion because he liked to be in the corner with the flag and the fighters, and also he trains. But now you're taking some, Silicon Valley guy. What happened to the Elon Musk versus Zuckerberg fight? The bottom line is big money guys. They have a certain aspect of corporate America, corporate work is cutthroat enough. They feel an association with fighters, and they get confused. They're not fighters in the same respect as the athletes in this sport. And at the end of the day, they're going to see that the passion's not there. You lose $50 million for a guy, and you'll see their passion go out there. I love this sport. Yeah, you love this sport. I guess Don Davis does too. Don Davis, who doesn't even watch the sport that he loves so much. And like I say, he's not losing any of his own money, so he's been able to talk other people. But we'll see if he has to go back to Qatar and ask them for another 100 million and see if they actually pony it up, or if they say, no, you know what, we're good.
Why do you think Davis? I know it's kind of. I don't think it's necessarily off topic, but it's off topic from the GFL. But why do you think he's? A lot of these Bellator champions are looking to go elsewhere now because they're not getting any fights. Why do you think he's doing that?
Um, because he doesn't have a successful formula or an idea of what he can only do what he knows to do. He's a one trick pony. He has no creativity and no background in doing sport, no ability to analyze what the difference between the failed companies are and the successful company, which really the only one is the UFC. Again, I've repeated over and over. I wish some people would listen to our podcast enough for this to sink in. When the UFC took over, they were losing money. They got on Spike TV, and that was the first TV contract that they had. And that gave them a bump in recognition, and the fighters started to become recognizable as athletes, not as human cockfighters. And that allowed them to do what? To scale up and have more shows. to diversify their Spike TV contract so that they were strong enough to now go on FS Sports, Fox Sports, and eventually to, Fox, the regular. They did a few shows on Fox, in New York. That's Channel 5.
Yeah, they were on Fuel TV for a while too.
Fuel TV. And that's the thing is so Spike says um,
I don't even know if Fuel TV is around anymore.
why not?
Spike isn't, right? It's gone.
Right, right. I think they were bought and absorbed by bigger companies because that's kind of what goes on in that business. But what happened with Spike was, you know, hey Spike, and this is sort of a theoretical, but something similar to this happened. So Spike, we've been doing this TV show. It looks like it was successful. The Forrest Griffin honor fight got unprecedented ratings for Spike. And now we want to do more weekly shows and more weekly fight shows like that. And Spike said to them, okay, but we're going to have to take April and May off because we want to go and do, whatever Spike TV had going on in terms of other programming, you know? And so Dana said, okay, no problem. And they went to Fuel TV. They had they were not exclusive to Spike. At some point, they were out of exclusivity and they were able to diversify. They get on Fuel TV. So you had Fuel shows and Spike shows and maybe Fox sports shows all going on at the same time. Meanwhile, these other companies have one TV contract with one company. And when that one company says the season shuts down here so that we can do reruns of Three's Company or whatever crap, they also put on. There's nowhere to put your product. You're done. You can't sustain 2 months off and then come back and be like, hey, we're back. It's like the UFC is, I forget where the nickname comes from. It's definitely one of the athletes in some sport, but the UFC has no days off. Don Davis is like, oh, I can't wait till the Europe tournaments are over so I can take Christmas off with my family and, we'll come back in April. Dana never thought that way. Dana was looking to make New Year's Eve shows and, what's the first show in January and then planning the Super Bowl shows. And, during the era where they had the big shows of the big Super Bowl show, the big July show with the fight conventions that they did, and then the big Thursday shows that were based around, November shows that were based around St. Pierre and Canada's, and then when Canada faded a little bit more into the background, there was a while where Canada was the biggest hotspot in MMA, and they were ready to take advantage of that. They fit that in and built the rest of the roster around it. And if you don't recognize that now, you can see UFC every single week, unless they say, we're going to take a week off because we just blew up and did, UFC 300, one of the biggest shows around. So we're going to take a week off and we'll be back in 2 weeks. These other companies are like, the season ends on TV. They let and this is the problem with Bellator, and we've said it over and over. When the TV channel tells you, yeah, we don't got space for you for these months, and you accept that and don't have another outlet to put your show on, it's a non-starter. That's why the UFC hasn't even mentioned, if they were a threat, Dana would have come out and crapped on them already. That's what they do. They'll take them down, And Dana's aggressive. Dana isn't going to be like, oh shit, I didn't realize that was happening. Man, I'm a little worried. So let me take some action. Dana read that PFL thing and, he's probably jaded enough that he didn't laugh at it. He probably was like, oh, not again. And he's bored and tired by it. But in no way, shape, or form did he call up Harry or, the Emanuels or whoever's in charge over there and be like, we got to do something. I'm worried. This is insignificant to them. And they're following formulas that are insignificant. They needed to set up their streaming service, have a couple of small, even if they're smaller cable channels, just make sure that your product, that you've got a roster that you can put fights on every week. And you kind of do have to build up to that. And make sure you've got an outlet to show those fights every single week. And then do that for 5 years, and you may get on the UFC's radar. That's what it's going to take now. And these guys, we're going to make what do we know what 6 cities these teams are in on 4 continents?
Mm-mm. No, he didn't say anything about it.
So fantastic. So is he still looking for cities? What? So yeah, we're going to do New York, and Toronto, and then London. Probably. I'd be surprised if they could do a show in Russia. Although Russia would be a good hotbed of talent that you could, in Asia, Tokyo, but Tokyo's time in this sport has waned, and you've got one over there that one may notice these guys and not like it and try to mess with their roster and stuff, and that would be enough to be a pain in the ass.
Maybe Australia, they could do something there.
Yeah, Australia.
There's a lot of fights in Australia, so.
Yeah, but the UFC can show up, to Australia, do a couple of shows a year, and they would leave absolutely. Not to mention the fact that every one of their other programs on a weekly basis are also available in Australia.
In Brazil, obviously, they're going to have a city in Brazil, maybe even Mexico.
Again, in Brazil, in Rio, where, at one point this sport was the most controversial thing, right now, the UFC, you can see UFC on every single week on TV in Brazil. So the UFC doesn't even need to do a show in Brazil or Australia to already be a presence there weekly. So what are you going to do? We have a city, you're going to capture the imagination of the city, have, 8 or 12 fighters from the city fight off and gain their points, and then take 3 months off before you can follow up on anything like that. I can't believe people are dumb enough to keep trying this.
We have to see their schedule and see how they're going to do it, but yeah.
They're already using some catchwords, though. They've already used season. They've already used teams. They already revealed 50 people on the roster that, I had at one point about 120 fighters on the Bodog roster. And I knew that, you have to get probably close to 500 in order to sustain weekly shows. So they're not even, if they announce it as a goal to do weekly shows, then, there might be something to root for there. They're not even heading in that direction, is what it seems. Seasonal show, like when they say you're going to have a season and people are going to gain points, and then then people are going to eliminate themselves. But okay, so here you got a guy you talked into, like even under the PFL format. So here you got guys that signed the contract, and yeah, I'm going to win the tournament. I'm going to win $1 million. And then all of a sudden you crap the bed and you're out in the first round. And, 2-3 months later, you call up Don Davis to ask him for when your next fight is, and you get his voicemail. They don't have a plan for a next fight for guys that they have under contract on a roster. In the PFL's case, they don't even have all the weight classes active. So if you're a Bellator champion, or even one of the top 5 guys in the Bellator in a weight class that the PFL hasn't even done for the year, they announce, these are the weight classes for the year, right? So if your weight class is on the sidelines, what are you going to do for the next year?
Yeah. So, I wonder if they're just trying to bot Bellator to kill it, not absorb it. It doesn't make sense because these guys are going to go to the UFC, and the UFC is going to have plenty of fresh fights to make with some of these people.
And as you mentioned,
And that's what they need.
and what we've looked at here is Bellator. To a certain extent, you have to say, okay, Bellator is probably the second most successful company that we've seen in MMA in the United States. They made several hundred shows. They ultimately were bought out and failed, and the TV channel wasn't eager to rescue them or keep them on. Um, but they are probably the second most successful company. And as you mentioned several times, I know that you're more of a fan of the early days of Bellator than myself, but under Bjorn Ripney, they actually had a guy, in his case, I would credit him with having some of the passion necessary.
Right, and he was
Because
willing to do something different. He kind of did what you wanted, which is he had a weekly show. It's on every Thursday, I believe. So they'd have, their season tournament. It was all tournaments. The season consists of like, I want to say 2 tournaments,
and
different weeks,
they
and
still
then they'd rotate into a new one.
once it turned, they also never succeeded in fixing the problem of once your season of tournaments is over and whatever channel you're on wants to show reruns of some other show for a couple of months
Right.
and not stick with you, they never overcame that. But I would credit Rebney with having some of the passion, even though at the end of the day he also bailed out and probably didn't bail out and sit there, it's like, now what am I going to do? I have no money. So he probably took some money, got out of it and stuff. But I think he probably saw that the formula that we're following here doesn't work, and I don't see an out. I think they were on a major Viacom. Well, at some point they got on a very big channel. Those
Spike.
types of well, this is after Rebney, maybe.
Yeah, after.
Some of those channels are going to insist on exclusivity, and that's the genius of what the UFC did, is that they managed to break the exclusivity. So the TV channel, ESPN walks into the room with their big cock swinging, and their arrogance and saying, yeah, but we don't want to see this product on anything else. We want it to be exclusive. And the UFC managed to somehow break that and get on other channels. It's like, no, when you can't show it because you're going to show bog rolling on ESPN, then we want to be able to do the other show. And Bellator was never able to overcome that. And Rebney got out for whatever reason. But in the early days, he had some passion. Scott Coker is a lifelong person of fights, but I wouldn't associate the word passion with Scott Coker. He was kind of a bland CEO that every once in a while made a move. But if you look at it, he's a California guy based out of Sacramento, and their biggest shows were in Sacramento, and maybe their highest moments were based on fighters from that area and fighters he had ties to for a long time. He
Mhm.
wasn't able to, he didn't expand his roster in the correct way. Yeah, yeah, they went out and got some Russians and things like that. And then they maybe relied on that too much. The diversity wasn't there or whatever. And again, by the time Rebney was involved, I don't. Rebney was out rather. I don't think they replaced it with a passionate guy. I think they replaced it with a guy who was a lifer in the business, and that was all he was going to do, but not with the type of passion that is necessary here. Rebney, you can associate that. The point of all this is that when the PFL bought Bellator, they did it because they've got a war chest from Qatar and from wherever they've located the money. But there's no doubt in my mind that the best roster there and that the biggest company there was actually Bellator, the one that got bought. They would have been better off keeping the Bellator name, expanding from there, doing whatever they want. They would have been better off focusing on some of the Bellator fighters.
I think
The
one
P-
other thing Rebney did good was 3 fights in 3 months. You had to win 3 fights in 3 months. So that you saw the guy that won over and over, boom, boom, boom. UFC has this problem. They'll have one guy fight who's fairly popular, and then you won't see them for a year, maybe 2 years. You know, and I think
Yep, yep.
that's hurting them in the pay-per-views because I've heard their pay-per-view numbers are way down.
Yeah, the thing about pay-per-view, we've been, since Floyd Mayweather retired in boxing, they've been singing about the death of pay-per-view and with the rise of streaming companies and stuff, the death of pay-per-view, they've been singing about it for 10 years now. And it is coming. It is coming. The chance of making people pay $80 a month or, for a pay-per-view on top of keeping a streaming service for $15 on Netflix. Put it on Netflix. Let Netflix pay you pay-per-view money. And they have another product that will keep people on board for $15 a month. The WWE, when the UFC announced their merger with WWE, I thought that was the way they were going to go because the WWE does have their own network and their own ability to put their pay-per-views out and their TV shows out on there. And they actually, to their credit, have a library that goes back so long that they could actually have you can spend 24/7 watching pro wrestling on the WWE network and not run out of shows to see. I add to on top of that the UFC, maybe they can bump that up to, from $15 a month to $20 a month. And with, 5 million people paying $5 a month more, now all of a sudden you're what? That's $25 million a month coming in the door.
I think it'd be more than that, probably more
Yeah,
people than
I
that. I
think
think
so
more
too.
people would. I don't think they'd lose subscribers over it.
Yeah, no, so yeah, again, the WWE and the UFC when they merged, it was because I think they recognized that they were not, and I think Dana was right when that executive said, every WWE fan is going to be a UFC fan, vice versa. He was wrong. I think Dana was wrong to crap on him in public, but Dana can't control himself. But I do think that they looked at each other as peers. You're a successful company. We're a successful company. If we work together, we'll be more successful. And again, if somehow you're looking at the remnants of the World Series of Fighting and the PFL and you label them a successful company, you can label them whatever you want. But are they really successful? I haven't seen anybody succeed in this sport except for the UFC.
And no one bought World Series of Fighting. It just kind of
No,
became the PFL.
yeah, I think they changed their name because they already saw that it was going nowhere. And in general, most people don't follow it, the sport like us, where they realize that's the thing or whatever. So maybe they wanted some type of fresh start. But yeah, like nothing about the GFL looks like, we're going to be talking about the GFL in 10 years.
And
Sorry to say it.
also the roster thing. Let's talk about that. So the majority of their roster is guys who are probably in their late 30s, early 40s, early to mid 40s. What are they going to do with that?
Yeah, like I said, geriatric fight league. You know, um, maybe the idea will be, um, again, this was the IFL's failure. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we got Pat Miletich signed. You know, he's no longer fighting, but he's going to be the captain of a team, and he's going to have guys in every weight class. It's like, okay, Pat, who you got at heavyweight? Okay, Pat, who you got here? It's like, and then Pat comes along and is like, yeah, I lost my lightweight. I don't have a lightweight. So they take a lightweight from some other place, some other city, and just throw him in there. That's not the way this works. You've got to be able to deal, you can't plug and play people. I can give an example from my history too, is, I dabbled with taking a fighter I thought had potential and sending him to a first class trainer. And, hopefully his career and his training and stuff would improve and he would jump up to the next level. But that's very superficial because at the end of the day, training is, about as personal a relationship as you're going to get in a sport. Sure, John Jones is a guy, maybe he doesn't have friends like that, and training him becomes a business enterprise. But at the core level, when you're bringing a guy along and growing him, that's a very personal thing. So if the guy doesn't get along with his trainer, doesn't like the methodology that they're using to train, that whole formula may not work out. You can't just plug and play people. And, so we'll see how they fill the rosters up. We'll see when they announce, Australia. So will the Australian team be just Australians? If they're in Sydney, will it be just fighters from Sydney? When that falls apart, will they bring, okay, we're going to take a couple of random guys from Japan and put them on Team Australia. Then, what about the team is Australia? It's like, again, we've seen these formulas. They didn't work, and they want to try them again. More power to you. Like Dana said, another guy that wants to lose all his money.
Yeah, the other thing I think they're going to have problems with when you have a team format is to keep everyone busy.
Yep.
Like I said with Bjorn Rebney, you're going to fight in this tournament. You're going to fight whoever is in the bracket. There's none of this nonsense. I don't want to fight this guy. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. This is the bracket. You're fighting. You're in this tournament. You have to win 3 fights. Period.
Yeah. And again, so here you have a team, and unless the team consists of every single active weight class, let's just say for now that they don't want to dabble in women, even though, you want to be equitable and modern and stuff, and you should include the women's weight classes, but just to keep it trim and efficient, you've got flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, heavyweight. So you've got 7 or 8 weight classes or whatever that is. Unless you have 5 or 6 guys on each team in each weight class, you have no ability. So what happens? Every guy goes into a tournament thinking, I'm going to win this tournament. At the end of the day, you go into a tournament, now you've got 4 guys that lose their first fights. And usually in the contract, that will mean that they got less money. And obviously the big prize money at the end, they can't count on that. So their lives are shattered. I can predict to you that one of the first things they're going to do is call up and say, when's my next fight? Right. And unless you've got 5 or 6 deep in each weight class where you can plug, all right, you're going to fight the number 3 guy on the roster in lightweight from Team London because he's also waiting for a fight. Unless you can do that, because if you're going to ask those people to wait, you just look like completely an amateur showcase, an amateur league, and if you can't keep your fighters happy, you will see the ones that do succeed jump ship to where they have some stability anyway.
And another one of their things I wanted to talk to you about this too is they're saying they're going to share 50% of the revenue with the athletes. Okay. And have a retirement plan. Well, you got to make money first to share it.
Right. So I was going to say, so what happens when they lose $40 million? Does that mean that they're going to ask the fighters, hey, it's like pony up 20 million? The fighters still got to get paid, If you happen to have an NFL or NBA team, they do revenue sharing in some of those leagues and stuff. So that the real successful money teams help out the smaller market teams so that there's balance. But in no way, shape, or form do even smaller teams look at, we're going to have a roster where the fighters or the players are just paid less because we're smaller. So, yeah, what are they going to do when they lose money? They have no revenue share. And that is, to me, was the nail in the coffin for Rebney. Was he tried to play the game like a lawyer, right? So what did he do? He took the UFC's contract, cut and pasted it, handed it to Eddie Alvarez and said, it's the same contract signed. And Eddie at least was smart enough to say, yeah, on page 31 of this, it talks about pay-per-view revenue and how I get, $1 for every pay-per-view up to a couple 100,000 I sell. And then if I sell from 500,000 to 800,000, I get $2 for each of those. and it scales up. So if you make it into big pay-per-view sales, you get a real decent paycheck. And we know from our friend Maisie that the UFC would even go to those fighters and say, look, you've got good potential and stuff, and we want to help you out. At the end of the day, they've projected that this guy may break into the big pay-per-view money, and they maybe do a $5 million paycheck at the end. So what do? They offer them $2 million up front to give up the pay-per-view rights. And Eddie at least was smart enough to say, you have no pay-per-views in your history. You have no ability to tell me where I'm going to fall into this, and what happens if I sign this contract and you sell 30,000 pay-per-views and you're going to give me $1 pay-per-view. That's $30,000 more. On the UFC roster, I would at least get several $100,000 for a pay-per-view because all their pay-per-views break into the $200,000-$300,000 range, even the worst ones. And because he cut and pasted the contract and said it's the same and tried to pull the wool over someone's eyes, I think he looked really bad for it. But I think that's an example that you have to see. Same thing with
And
my
then he
experience
sued
with
him, which didn't help either. In the fans' eyes, he sued Eddie
exactly.
Alvarez.
He got himself into a situation where he may have been legally right. It is the same contract. And he may have said, okay, if we get into court, I'll win because of legal semantics. But he didn't take into account the hit that he would take in just logic. And on pay-per-view with Bodog, we did 2 pay-per-views. One was headlined by Fedor. The other was headlined, we had Eddie Alvarez on this pay-per-view. It was headlined by Roger Gracie's MMA debut. It's good names, None of those pay-per-views cleared 50,000 sales. The pay-per-view game is a game, just like everything else we're talking about here, is if you're on the ground floor, you've got to be prepared. It's a building process. So when you have your second pay-per-view and it sells 50,000 and you give up, you've done that. You've just given up. What the UFC said was like, okay, here's the next one, and 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 they never gave up until the thing actually picked up. Anybody that doesn't have that passion and the sustainability is a non-starter. Again, 50,000. They're going to do revenue sharing of 50%. And why is that? Because the UFC is rumored to be spending less than 20% on the fighters, and they think that we just took a shot at the UFC. Again, I already mentioned Dana's not calling up and being like, "Oh my God, the GFL is offering 50%. We're going to have to change our formula." Absolutely not. Dana, like I said, this is so failed already that Dana's not even laughing at this. He would have laughed at this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but he's tired of laughing at shit like this. It doesn't even get on his radar anymore. This is why this has failed so many times. This is why you see the dated version of Dana that we sometimes see now, is because he has literally seen it all. Like I think if I had to guess, his honest reaction were like, again, you're kidding me. But kidding without the actual humor and making him laugh. So yeah, I feel bad for the GFL. Like I said, if they were to hire me as a consultant, it would probably not go well either because they're not going to want to hear that they have to break this whole thing down. Everything all the groundwork and stuff that they've announced that they've set up is really a non-starter. And that they have to break it down and start again and be prepared to make the most out of whatever investment money you have so that you're there in 5 years and you have enough to show that if you do need more money, that you're able to get more money because you're able to show some growth. It's like we started out with 10 shows a year, and we've built it up to 30 shows a year, and we've got 2 channels we're working with and things like that. And if we keep going with this formula, add another TV channel, add another series of shows so that we're up to 40, 45, then you're constantly in the public eye and you have a chance at maybe breaking through in recognition so that, if somebody goes in, there's nobody, people might watch the PFL. There's some people out there that do, right? But none of them are saying, I wonder what the PFL is doing this week. Because the likelihood is that the answer is nothing. Meanwhile, a UFC fan, a casual UFC fan, hey, I haven't watched the UFC in 3 or 4 weeks. I wonder what they got going on. Click, and there it is, a new show. It boggles my mind that people don't, that executives, that people who've made money don't recognize that's the single only factor that makes the UFC completely separate and completely at the point where they don't have to worry about other competitors. Unless you're going to do the work. That's the other part is people don't want to do the work. They think we're going to have cities, we're going to have teams. Each team is going to have a color, and you're going to have a logo.
I'm going to get a bunch of guys who used to be in the UFC 20 years ago, and now they're 40 years
yeah,
old.
And we're going to put them, on the Australian Outbacks, and we're going to have red and white shirts with the Outback, and we're going to buy the crocodile hunter's image to put on there, and all the fighters are always going to wear that, and we're going to sell precisely 9 shirts. It's people think, oh, it's the teams. Yeah, I think that was one of the bugaboos about the IFL was they thought that the team shirts would catch on. I could tell you from the inventory I looked up, there were T-shirts, then there were the sleeveless basketball shirts, hoodies, hats. They thought they were going to make their money selling. I'm a fan of the Iowa Razorbacks or whatever the team was called, or the Boss Rutan Pythons or whatever, and I'm going to wear a Python shirt. Again, unless people are like, Pythons, I like the Pythons because I can't believe the unbelievable career Anderson Silva had as a Python, and I'm really an Anderson Silva fan. And to show that, it's like they're trying to sell a one-off. You're making me upset, Todd.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing to end on, though, because you kind of, like I said, you're kind of hit home on why this stuff hasn't worked before and how it's frustrating that people just try the same thing again and not really have any creativity on any level, not just with the format, but with the fighters they pick up. It's almost like now WCW did become successful, but at the beginning, Eric Bischoff, what do? He hires a bunch of fighters or wrestlers from WWE that are older, and so I think that's what they're doing.
It's not the same thing. The thing is, in pro wrestling, it's not the same thing because one of the problems that we've already outlined in this sport is when a guy loses, how are you going to follow up and get him another fight? And then also the fact is even the winners, you can't crank them out every week and get that name recognition and stuff unless you're really carefully managing that so that you're putting them out there as much as possible, which, in the case of guys like Holland and Cerrone and guys like that, maybe every once in a while they'll take a fight on a month's notice. That's not really sustainable. In pro wrestling, you could throw those guys out there every 2-3 days. So that WCW is not a comparison that you can make in this sport. And it's a strange thing because the other part of it is this point, UFC, we compared them to Google afterwards, and this will be a good thing, I think, if you want to close, is right now, if you want to do, a search engine or an AI or something like that, it competes with Google. You've got to be willing to lose money, and you've got to be willing to do so for maybe a decade. So that at some point, people realize that you're in the business and you're a competitor and you're out there. If you're going to give it 2 good years and then we're still not there, we're going to quit. Then you've done just that. You've lost your money and you quit. You've got to be ready to take this and do this for the long haul. And that's where the passion comes in. And none of these people show me that passion. Um, and kind of hope you make money. And you can be careful, sign the fighters to more reasonable contracts. You're gonna signing big names to big contracts is not a good idea. Maybe they're students, and then you're going to be dealing with little name recognition on your roster. But if you're cranking out weekly shows and somebody's like, I want to see fights, what's on? Click, click. Oh, look, there's VFL again. Oh, look, there's VFL again. And week after week after week, you're there with a new roster. Oh, at some point, 3 months down the line, you'll be like, I recognize this guy. This guy knocked out that other guy. Remember that knockout where the guy was twitching? That's that same guy. You need 10 years of that kind of history for you to imprint yourself in the memory of the fans. If you don't, and you're not willing to work to that, if you think some cheap formula is going to be a shortcut for that, then all I have to give you is the experience of the last 20 years in this sport to tell you the formula doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things, like people keep trying it, there's always going to be another one and another one. But who's ever going to be creative? And that's what we aren't getting.
Yeah, there's one board every minute. And even creativity, there's a certain amount of creativity, but the creativity comes into, we used to say when we were doing shows consistently, on the week of the show, at least 3 things are going to go wrong. It's like I remember being in Russia with a huge budget, 50 fighters, 50 cornermen in the hotel, 2 weeks of filming under our belts. And then on the day of the fights, 2 of the ropes break on the ring. It's like, yeah, you know what? You have to have been savvy enough to have backup ropes and get that done. You know what I mean? I mentioned when fighters dropped out on me and I had to get fighter from Finland and fighter, he was a Bulgarian guy that was there to referee and get those guys and plug them in. Your other option is to cancel main events and not have those guys fight. You're in a situation where I've been advertising this main event fight. Now, neither guy's going to fight. Guess what? You can explain if one guy was out, presenting the other guy, and yes, this is a backup fight and things like that. But you've got to be able to do that. And you've got to not be discouraged because guess what? It is going to happen again. That's where the creativity comes in, is to put your head down and solve the problems that you're running into and not let them stop you. And be aware that the next show, there's going to be more problems until you're a well-oiled machine like the UFC. When you see Kevin Holland, Cerrone, guys like that came to the forefront, why is that? Because Dana knew from experience that guys like John Jones, Chael Sonnen, or those guys won't take a fight on the last minute. But he knows the guys on his roster that will. So he's able to plug them in and work them. That's where the creativity comes in, knowing and being aware and solving the problems that you're going to face, trying to scale up to be on the level of a multi-billion-dollar corporation.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, as always, just tremendous insights into these topics. And as you always say, as I said at the beginning, just, like the chat, subscribe to the channel, like the videos. And also we're going to start doing every Thursday night, we're going to do some question and answer. And, people can come on, we can kick around some topics, whatever you want to talk about.
Todd and I are aware we're not a huge channel. We're not too worried about it, but we do know that we have some hardcore fans, people who've been around for a long time, and people who do listen and appreciate us and some of our insights and some of our shows. So the live event is for those people. Try to show up Thursday. I think it'll be 7 p.m. Central Time. Is that what we're looking at? So next Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, you'll have a crack at myself and Todd live. You can try to catch us with new spin and stuff. And if not, just participate and be involved. Love to have you. Love to see people. The first show, maybe 3 or 4 of you will show up. Just like I've been talking about, we're going to keep doing it on a weekly basis. So the next time 6 people show up, and the next time 10, and maybe in a couple of years, we're going to have a nice sustainable audience and a show that will be worth everybody to watch, that will catch people on. For now, we know it's going to be a hardcore show, but hey, Todd and I, we're hardcore guys. So here we go off on a new adventure, and we know we're going to put our money where our mouth is on this one in terms of everything I said in this sport podcast will apply to that. If we quit doing that after 3 months, then we didn't really give it a shot. So we'll see. We'll try to back it up.
And we'll still do our regular videos. You don't have to worry about that. But this is going to be a live thing, and I think as we're doing it, it's going to get better and better.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, Miguel, as always, appreciate your insight, and it's always great having you. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and until the next episode, see you later.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Atkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms. The House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.